Thank you very much, and thanks to the organizers. Nice to be back in India. Thanks to Rahul, we met in Cape Town. I have a lot to tell, and please stop me, because I know for a fact that I prepared more than I actually have time for, but it is important when you come from so far that you can share with people what actually drives the work that we do. I come from Cape Town, as you've heard, and I run an office of about 30 people. This is my team. And I think it's important to mention that we rely very much on our teams, and our focus in our practice is making sure that young designers, young architects have an opportunity to learn from what we do, but also that we learn a lot from them. We are very much influenced by our cultures, our people, our lifestyles, our forms, and we derive our influence in architecture and design from just the simple things that people do, how they use mud to decorate their floors or their walls. We use texture, we use, all the things that, especially in the African context, have been used over decades to beautify themselves, using metal bangles and all that. And we asked ourselves the question, why doesn't architecture actually start addressing this and reflecting this in the buildings? When we did the South African Embassy in Berlin, we actually had to get a group of women who have practiced an indigenous technique which is called litema in Sesotho. And it's basically about using carved plaster to decorate walls and do murals. And in fact, they used to do it in mud in those days. And today they actually do it in carved plaster. And in fact, the end product is that of actually mixing oxides in the plaster. And this is what then becomes the kind of colored, textured kind of finish that we've been able to achieve, especially in that building, which has been mentioned to have received an award of excellence. Our work is largely on public sector projects. We do educational institutions in urban and rural conditions. We do some urban interventions, housing initiatives, and dialogue in particular, and obviously advocating for socially sensitive design. We do believe that we should be elevating the role of design to address social challenges that we face. Sorry. This conference for us is very important. It resonates with the work we do, and I feel like I'm actually in good company. And I think that a lot of what I hear and what I see is not far from what we are trying to do. Obviously, speaking about architects in India, in Palestine, I realize that these are countries, cultures, people with rich and deep histories. Our histories in South Africa in particular have been totally eradicated, and part of our work is trying to actually find what has made people sustain themselves over time. Now, I will just briefly deal with housing because, as we were preparing for this conference, I was asked about, challenges in South Africa. And I'm very happy to speak after someone who's actually a specialist in housing. But we do have a government program that seeks to address mass housing, especially for the poor. And this is based on a subsidy system, which basically identifies beneficiaries based on their income. And the lowest beneficiary income is 3,500 Rand. That's about, divided by 5, 750 rupees, I think, something like that. No, multiply, sorry. That's about 15,000 rupees or something like that. And you get a subsidy of about 80,000 Rand for a 42 square meter house. And then the next level beneficiary will be those earning around 8,000 Rand. And they then get access to either cheap loans or there's some kind of a subsidy which they get. And this the government has negotiated with commercial banks to try and assist in terms of running this project. But what I must say is that I don't think South Africa was ready and had the proper infrastructure to actually implement this huge task of building the millions of houses that are actually showing in the backlog there. The more houses we build, the greater the backlog actually becomes. That's the reality of it. What we then get in the government kind of houses is this kind of thing, which basically are single story buildings that are scattered all over the landscape, and you get kind of urbanscapes like those in the urban cities, very dense, but at the same time totally different densities to India. And this is what you see, this is what you would call a township in South Africa. And we've actually inherited the township and are actually reproducing it somehow, sadly so. And this is how these look in the landscape. These are new townships that have been built post 1994. And we have to live with this reality that we are densifying, in my opinion, in the wrong way. What we find are these very monotonous systems. But what is even worse is that in the rural areas where you have a kind of a homestead situation where people build, okay, in a linear kind of way, there's always the traditional rendezvous. They have got a millie field where they plow. They've got actually a kraal where they keep their cattle because people are still farming actually. And then we come and say, well, we're building houses for the people now, and this is what we built. It's actually quite painful. And when you look at it in the broader context, this is a rural kind of setting, and this is what we are doing on the outskirts of cities. This is the outskirts of a rural city. And this is the kind of reality we are dealing with at this point. There are some attempts to densify in the cities. This is in Johannesburg. This is Brickfields, where we're trying to work, architects are trying to bring in courtyards so that you can have protected spaces and play areas. And this is starting to say, well, we should be densifying in a different way. And these are some of the social projects that have actually started emerging in the last few years. And in Cape Town as well, there's the N2 Gateway, which was an attempt to bring some densification. You can see an attempt to come and do some kind of courtyard type situation. And these are G+1, which are basically double-story buildings. The good thing about them is that they are close to the city, but they are actually far from what I think we should be doing. Now, this is the reality of townships in terms of having these congested landscapes of informal settlements, shacks, shanty towns, and these are actually not different from what you'll have as your favelas in Brazil, your barrios in Caracas, and in fact, I did this before I knew India, so I think I should be throwing in some Mumbai here and the densities that I've come to realize. So we were invited to be part of a process of trying to contribute low-cost housing design by Design Indaba in Cape Town. And the real challenge of this place is that there's no spaces, as we've been hearing the whole day, no spaces for people to unfold, to recreate, for children to grow, for children to play, which is basically what children want to do. And what you also find is that there are challenges of fires in these places because they are unsafe. They are built with materials that actually will catch fire. People use paraffin stoves. Even though there's an insurgence of electricity, you can see the poles similar to the streets of Delhi and Mumbai that I see. But the dangers of fires, because Cape Town is a very windy city. Any fire that catches, it spreads like wildfire, actually. And what you find in these places, obviously, is the dense and informal economies, which is about urban survival. There are people who are actually producing the shacks so that you don't have to build your own. You can actually get it prefabricated, and then you just go and build it. And this is just to give you also just a sense of how Cape Town actually is structured. Downtown Cape Town is here. This is where about not more than 100,000 people live, and this is the CBD of Cape Town. And then you have the southern suburbs, Rondebosch, right down to Constantia, Bishop's Court, all the leafy suburbs are around here. There's actually a railway line that goes along here, and then you've got the other side of Cape Town. That is what is supposed to be the area where black people, and in fact in South Africa we have South Africans of Indian origin who have got their own areas. We've got black people who've got their own areas. We've got colored people with their own areas. It's still there, but maybe, physically it's going to take us decades to actually change that environment. These are how the townships work or feel like. Quite established areas, and you can see there's a lot of temporary stuff happening along the edges, and then you've got the new areas happening at the back. And this is just another picture of the roofscapes of how it actually looks, all built under power lines, and people tap. There is a huge electrification process that has happened in both rural and urban conditions. Now, what we did then was to, as part of this design and our process, investigate how can architects respond differently to these challenges. And we found, as I said in one of the codes, that architects actually hardly ever discover things. They actually find the potential of the materials that are there that are being used, and then you must be able to use those differently. So we found the sandbag construction, which we felt is quite important in that it actually brings back the aspect of community being involved in building. And we found that this is a very important thing. It's been mentioned the whole day, how people get or derive ownership by just being involved. And this was very important for us. And during the construction, we had the entire community of the 10 buildings that we're doing, building from one house to the next. And what we obviously had to do was to first convince them that to build in a sandbag house, you'll get a decent housing product. And we had to use models to actually explain how the system works. It's a timber frame structure, basically, which is spaced at about 900 centers. In fact, in later projects, we've reduced this to about 600 because it makes it easier to build and to plaster or to clad. And then you've got your wire mesh that is placed. In fact, you have the bags packed in between that structure, and then you have your wire mesh so that you can have your plaster holding onto something, and then you paint after that. We use all this to convince the people that firstly it will be a safe building. We worked with engineers who sadly had to convince us that we need a ring beam here, and this is the only place where we've used concrete, and at the top here to hold the roof, because the echo beams are actually only about 2.5 meters high. You could have them obviously longer if you use a different material, but we've tried to avoid materials that have got a toxic or have got a high energy content in manufacture. And this is basically the plots that were allocated. Unfortunately, we could not change the fact that everybody was allocated a plot. And if I had the choice, I would have liked to actually do a complete different urban layout. This is just simple double-story buildings with the bottom being kind of a lounge kitchen area with stairs going up, and then actually here, and the wet cells at the bottom, and then you get your stairs, and then we did 2 bedrooms at the top, the bigger one being the children's one, because the people who live here have got large families. And we tried to make sure that the kids have got space and a little corner where they can study. The parents get a smaller room, but they also get a balcony outside, which we saw as an area where the house could grow. And it's kind of like an incremental approach, things that we learned from the Charles Correas and so on, but doing it at a very small scale here. This is how it happened, that these timber frame structures with a metal lattice were brought to site, and we actually were engaging with the community in terms of getting this put up. No foundations other than basically having sandbags on the floor, on the ground, and then you put this thing on it. And obviously, because we've got quite high water tables, we provided some kind of dam proofing, and then the building goes up. And this was kind of like the start of the ground floor. And so it goes on, and I think I don't need to mention the fact that this is the building that has made us to be actually here in India, because when you do these small, very problematic, actually almost difficult projects, you actually realize that they actually give you more than any embassy you've built, because this kind of project has made us to be as known as we are today. And we think that it is an investment. It is social capital. It is design that makes a difference, but it also design that engages you with the people and the realities of how people actually live. And it is important for architects, young architects, to be prepared to go that route, because it's not a simple route. It's not like, this is I always say in the office, we spend the most time and resources on this project proportionally than any project we've ever done. But obviously, the results have actually shown. And in fact, we were also part of the design with the other 90% cities in New York. And just pictures of how the construction was going. We chose to have kind of single double-story units because everybody kind of expects to have their own. So it's not everyone living on top of the other. This is one family. These were 54 square meters as opposed to the 42 square meters which the government offers. And then we chose to also have some kind of back-to-back row house type construction so that we could save on the wall in between and not have kind of a wall just standing on its own. And basically, this was a part of the experimentation. And these are the spaces that you create. This is the children's room. And you can see that we actually spread the windows in all African buildings. And in fact, I think it's the same in India. You'll never have large windows. You have small ones because you don't want the sun to penetrate into the inside of the building, because glass is actually the transporter of heat. So instead of having big window areas, we decided to spread them in small components. But you can see the amount of light that they provide inside the space. Some of these houses have now got double bunk beds because this was the idea. They had just moved in here and coming from actually a shantytown squatter situation where they didn't have all the necessities we have. The buildings are occupied now. They all have some kind of as part of this project, solar geysers have been provided, and kids are actually using that balcony that we've created as a play space because there's hardly any play spaces around. And this is how it looks from the back. They are actually being used, and you'll find that when you go there today, a lot of the families are actually extending at the back to create themselves additional space. And this is how it looks from the front. We decided deliberately to bring the buildings close to the edge of the street as possible. In fact, when you go there now, similar to what Fida was saying, there are fences here built with corrugated iron, others built in timber and everything, and it's kind of having its own life. And we tried at the beginning to say maybe we'll give guidelines, but actually you shouldn't do that. People are occupying the space as they wish, and whether we like it or not, they are doing what they do best. And in fact, talking about individuality of color, we had the same approach where each house has got its own color. And these things are just basically derived from how people dress, how people do beads and all that, because this is all part of how people just live, to use these simple things to make their places beautiful. We've continued with the sandbag exploration, and have just finished a soup kitchen building. Not a big building, it's very small, 104 square meters. But we're trying to see how best we can take this construction further. It was not just one and once-off thing. And as I said, we're now putting the frames a little bit closer, using actually staircases outside so that we can maximize the space inside. And this is how the building has actually look like. Here I was hosting a group of French architects who had come to see what we're doing in the townships. This was when we were putting the ceiling for the top floor, and this is how it looks. And we've kept the echo beams actually exposed because we don't have to hide the construction. People must know and see what it is all about. And this is a soup kitchen that is actually feeding about 250 children every day, and giving them also facilities for aftercare in these township conditions. And what we've done differently here, we've actually used timber boarding inside to make the spaces a bit warmer. In the first buildings, we plastered everything, but in this one, we've decided that let us also continue the whole process of sustainability and use timber, even if it's supposed to be a low-cost community kind of building. And this is how it looks as the entire, the bottom is the kitchen and the eating area, and upstairs it's where the children have their computer rooms and their places where they can do homework, and then that space also becomes used for dancing and doing other extramural activities.
Luyanda, we have about 5 minutes more.
Okay. Let's just quickly run through just a few other projects which are of a different scale. We were commissioned to refurbish and modernize 5 stations in the Cape Town kind of network. That's the main city center station, and then those are the 5 stations that we were asked to do. And again, you've got a situation where some of these are actually on residential areas, some of them are actually on feeder stations for a larger area, and we basically looked at some other different conditions where, again, it's kind of squatter areas around the station, very dense around the station, and you actually realize that the stations become trading hubs, others totally fragmented. You don't know where the entrance is, where is the main station. Someone can come in here straight to the platform, and there's the main station building, but you can also come through here. So there's a whole problem of controlling tickets and all this. So the rail agency is actually trying to create a different environment. There are bridges over these shacks, the road to the station. These are so-called overhead stations, and you can see that you actually, from the ground, you go up, and then in order to go down to the platform again. And you've got these heavy staircases that people have to traverse. In some situations there are ramps, and in some there are not. So we have to, as architects, respond to that. And these are actually hubs where people are actually trading informally. I don't think it's different in Mumbai, and in fact in India in general. Ramps become the areas of trade where people trade in everything possible, from traditional medicines to belts, pantyhoses, everything you can find. And we thought that it is important for us to understand who we're actually building for, and what kind of environment do we want to provide for them. And this is the existing station. These stations are totally overcrowded, and you can see that actually they need to be 3 times bigger. Most important is to create urban nodes at the ends where there are trading kind of areas. We're increasing the street-to-street access because these stations are actually linking communities, and this will be the public area, which also will be a place of trade, then the main station and the operational area, and making sure that every station has got a ramp. And this is how they've grown. It's also just talking about the design processes that we engage in. And we use the metaphor of coming up from the ground down to the platform as actually to inform the design of the station. And we've tried to make sure that we increase the volumes so that you get more light, you get more airy conditions, rather than this flat box, which is currently, in some cases, carrying about 70,000 people every peak hour, every 15 minutes. And this is the kind of response we've come up with. Totally modern station, but with all the facilities that people need on the day-to-day still provided. And creating that street-to-street access with light, with air. This is the original box, which we've integrated into the design, and so that we make sure that we can utilize because the station has to remain operational as it is being modernized or refurbished. The higher volumes, more light, airy spaces, integrating community art as well, because we have to work with communities in these things. Otherwise, the people will be totally alienated from them. And obviously, we know this picture very well. We have not come that far yet, but we're trying to avoid not to get there. The last project I'd like to share with you is one of eradicating mud schools in the rural areas of South Africa, where this picture I took in 2012. This child is actually disinfecting the classroom. The schools had just opened using cow dung. And people have been using this over years to disinfect because they have found out that cow dung is actually quite healthy. And I got there, and she was actually doing this after school to disinfect the classroom. This is the kind of classroom they had, a mud kind of classroom, totally inappropriate, and in some situations, like a row of classes like that. And obviously here, it's really about, we had to build 50 schools in 1 year. I think someone had to build 300 in 3 years? And I thought, oh my God, I'm complaining about 50 only. So in order for us to deal with the 50 in 1 year, we had to introduce or find an approach that would allow us to do that. I had 6 weeks to go out to tender and to call for construction from day of appointment. So we decided to with the team to approach it from a kit of parts basis. So we designed every kit, and this is what then would be given to the builder for all the schools. And then come up with some kind of a site-making process. And we went back to what we know. How to organize buildings, not make complicated structures. Someone said this before. Individual buildings, these are the kits. The purple here is what we needed to integrate if there was an existing classroom, which was decent enough to be kept. Then you would have your admin classrooms, admin building, nutrition, and then we would have to put grade R as well, which is a requirement now by government. So we did this on the different sites, but having designed the kits individually. And what we would do is to then rearrange them. And here, there's a tree that we found on this site, and we also wanted to build a school around that tree. And these are the buildings, because out of the 50, in the second year, we are now on number 40. So we have till the end of the year, hopefully, to do the rest of the 10, which I think in the conditions we have is incredible, is an incredible achievement. Just going through this, just showing you the different forms that you get. But this is what you do when you use your design skills to respond to a given situation. And here, there was not supposed to be a school, but the government had decided this is, every building is 3 meters from the other in terms of height difference. It's a very steep slope. But we had to make it work, and we had to integrate this existing building. Now, this is a typical rural school that you get. No kind of placemaking opportunity, and we said we do not want to end up here. You will realize that insofar as the grade R is concerned, we also had to do some kind of a psychology of design, because kids come from this environment. They come to school on the first day, and you don't want them to be alienated. So we decided to make the grade R to be kind of similar to home, with the sandpit, play area, so that, and the big veranda, because we've got the challenge of heat and a lot of sun, and again, small windows that are spread so that you can avoid a lot of sun. And these verandas, we just use wattle, what we call latte, to create these shaded spaces, and again, use color to differentiate the different buildings. And this is the original classroom they had, and we've reinterpreted this into grade R, and created new classrooms. This is how it looks inside and how much light actually falls into that space. Taking these forms and using different kinds of windows. You want children to be creative, to be kind of experimental. They must be able to peep at their lower level, and also when they're bigger. When they're small, they look through here. When they're bigger, they look through there. When they're really big, or the teacher at least can look through and see the environment.
Luyanda, we've overshot the time limit.
All right, I'm almost done. That's the old school. This is the new school with a yard, with an assembly area, a grassed area for kids to be able to also sit on grass, not only on concrete. Your admin building is a center space that can actually supervise the kids. We introduced the idea of rainwater harvesting by convincing the government that each school needs about 20 tanks so that we can collect the water. These areas are not on the grid, they're not in the municipal water system, and you want kids to have water to drink. And this is one of the things we found when we're doing. This is how these schools are looking in the environment. They are becoming urban centers actually there. And the different challenges of site and topography, and how we've responded to them. And this is just a landscape of rural areas in the Transkei area with rivers. This is not far from the sea. And for us, it's meaningful social change because it's about the future of the children. And I think if we invest a bit of time in creating those spaces where kids can unfold, then we will have done our job. Just the last 2 slides. Cape Town, as it has been mentioned, is World Design Capital 2014. And we hope the Rahuls and all our colleagues, friends, will make sure that they are part of the events that are going to unfold. But 2014 is actually focused South Africa, because the UIA Architecture Congress is also in Durban. So we're very fortunate that we can be in a situation where all design focus, architects are going to be focusing on South Africa next year, and it happens to be 20 years after our democracy, so we'll be celebrating it through design. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Luyanda.